Hello and welcome to the Field Engineer channel. My name is Guy, and on this channel we discuss topics of interest to field engineers and field managers. I have with me today Paul Camidge. Paul joined the field engineering community in April of 2022. He is a senior regional service manager based out of the UK, and he has a rich career as a field service engineer before moving up the ranks to management. Paul worked with different reputable companies in the medical devices industries, and today we have the chance to speak with him. Welcome, Paul. I'm happy to have you with me today.
Thanks, Guy. Good to be here.
All right, let's get into it. Paul, actually, before going to the core of the discussion, maybe we can start by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career advancement, and all that.
Yeah, sure. So I guess like most field managers, I'm an engineer by trade. I started out in the car industry. I was an electrician for a company that doesn't exist anymore, the Rover Group, that built cars just outside Oxford. I didn't go to university. I left school at 16 and became an apprentice electrician for them. Did that for a few years and then fell into the medical industry by taking a job at a hospital as a hospital engineer. And it's interesting that LinkedIn at the moment has got loads of posts about how important medical engineers are. What it doesn't say is what a fascinating job being a medical engineer is. If you wanted one industry which was really interesting to get into, I would recommend anybody gets into the medical industry because it is fascinating. And I was as an engineer for a hospital for 10 years until saw the light and decided to go and move to a commercial organisation and joined a British company that made infusion devices called Smiths Medical. And that's where a real split in my career happened, is that I was poached to go into the sales team. So I'm one of this really unusual band of engineers that went into sales. Now, I will be completely honest, for 20 years of my career, I said there wasn't a single chance in hell I was going to become a salesperson. No, not for me. It's nothing, never. And of course, just to prove that if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans, I loved it. And I did it for about 2 years and thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my career. Engineers, no. I'm not interested anymore. I will carry on doing that. And then suddenly I got approached by Smiths, who I was working for, to say, listen, we need somebody to manage the newly formed field service and technical support group because they've got a problem. They felt that the engineering team thought that all salespeople were sharp-suited so-and-sos that would sell their grandmother for a fiver. And the salespeople thought that all the engineers were Neanderthals who dragged their fingers on the ground when they walked. And they needed somebody that could explain both sides of the story to each group of the people. So I fell into management, and so ended up back in engineering. And from there, I've worked for companies making medical devices, and then I've gone into diagnostics, working for companies making diagnostics testing machining, until I'm now managing multiple countries for Cepheid.
Interesting and fascinating, your career track and how you went from the car industry. And by the way, I still remember the brand Rover. You know, people of our tenure, if I put it that way.
Good age, yeah.
We know brands that disappeared. And the way you progressed through your career is really fascinating. What took you from the car industry into the medical devices field? How did that happen?
The first thing to say about my career is it wasn't planned. I don't think at any time I've ever had this idea, this framework that I was working to get somewhere. I always felt that I wanted to advance or do something different. I never wanted to feel like I was in a job for a long period of time doing the same thing. Whether you move teams, whether you move sideways, that's cool. But there was never an overriding kind of thread that goes through it. I kind of decided, well, I'd had enough. The car industry is noisy, smelly, dirty. I possibly could make some joke about hospitals being far more attractive environments, particularly for a young man, as I was back then. The reality was, it looked on when I applied for it as being a great job, and I wanted a job. What I didn't realise was how much it would influence the rest of my career. And once I got into it, there was never a chance. I mean, I've been offered jobs since going out of medical, and I've always said no, because I know that that's one thing I would personally miss if I wasn't in this environment.
I totally agree with you. And a lot of us, people I've spoken with from the field engineer community, have the same kind of circumstances or even career path, where some of us went into it by interest or by mere coincidence. But once we're in it, it's like, this is it. This is it for us.
Yeah.
And being an engineer, I think we like solving problems. We like to bring solutions. You did that in sales, and that gave you the edge being an engineer, because you, as an engineer, you cannot just sell anything just to sell. I think, and from my perspective, I worked in sales too, and it's like you want to make sure that you are selling your customers the solution that you think is best for them and with the input that you get from them. It's not like you can sell them anything, right?
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how the industry will give you a narrative that engineers, we're this discrete bunch that stay in our own lane and we don't go anything up. But I would totally agree with you. If you've got fundamental engineering background, and that doesn't really matter whether that's a chemical engineer, a mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, it's the same mindset that underpins the entire of the word, the people who are engineers. That framework serves really well wherever you go, whether you are in sales, because you're absolutely right. It's that understanding the need. It's the understanding, particularly in management, of the why. Yes, it can be a disadvantage at times. There are certain circumstances where we don't do ourselves any favors as a group. But it is really interesting how we're perceived as being one thing, but actually we permeate into all sorts of parts of society, people who actually are engineers by their very, I guess, their trade.
Right. And you had the chance to work in a hospital before moving to the private sector. How did you see the difference between the healthcare system, working the healthcare system, versus being a service provider with a private company for the healthcare system?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think that I mean, obviously in the UK, we have the peculiarity of the National Health Service, which is akin to the religion that underpins the whole of the country, which I appreciate very, very few countries have. So we have this peculiar ideal that somehow the NHS is on a pedestal, and we shouldn't. We should treat it as such. I never really saw it as anything other than the same job. And when I left the health service, I went to a company. I was essentially doing exactly the same job. There was just a different name on my paycheck. I still felt that we were servicing a customer base. I know that sounds trite to say if you're in a hospital, it's a customer base, but we didn't treat patients. So it wasn't, I didn't find it that different, but I know some people do struggle because they like that even closer patient care. It is funny, you know, you leave the healthcare environment and suddenly you're not allowed the same access to people as you did when you were before, yet you're doing the same job. So I didn't really have too much of an issue with it.
Okay, it's a bit of a different world, because now you are not part of the healthcare system, you are not within, you are from the outside working for a service provider. I had the chance to do both also, and it is a nice experience because you get both angles.
Yeah.
You are a customer to service providers, and then you are the service provider. So having been a customer, you better probably understand the needs of the hospital and what you ask for from the service provider. And when you become the service provider, you know you have walked in the shoes of the customer and you know how to provide the best service, right?
Yeah, I think it gives you a credibility. And even if you don't know, it gives you the credibility to at least ask the questions, to understand the environment. You can frequently see engineers who are used to being in the environment because they feel they appear comfortable, and ones who are not are the ones that feel uncomfortable, be it the proximity to patients or in our arena in a laboratory environment, patient samples. It's not always the nicest looking, and it certainly isn't the nicest smelling environment, as anybody that's a lab technician will agree. And it does give you that credibility if you kind of understand what's going on, even if you perhaps aren't an expert. So I think it does help if you've got that back.
Right. Going back to working in sales, you mentioned something about how the dynamics are between the sales organization and the service organization.
Well, that was back then. That's 30 years ago. So
right. But I
things
think
change.
it still goes the same way, where there's a kind of collaboration, but at the same time, kind of rivalry, where the sales organization sees itself as the income provider, because if they don't sell, service doesn't have a job. But vice versa, service sees it differently, because if service is not doing a great job, the sales organization will not be successful in selling and repeating business with existing customers, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's. I mean, thankfully, the number of companies where there is open warfare between service and sales organisations, I think, is now far less. Certainly, I haven't experienced it. Friction, yes, but you know, constructive friction is never a bad thing in any environment. What I do think is interesting is the servitization theories that Professor Tim Baines from the Advanced Services Group in Birmingham has been promoting as where to really completely change your view on how money is made in organizations. Because you're absolutely right. The sales organization will say, look at all these millions we make compared to the thousands you make. With the greatest respect, we get the biggest slice of the pie. Therefore, we are the breadwinners. And that's true. If you look at the P&L on a very basic, what Tim Baines and the team are doing is turning that on its head and saying you can only ever make money from your own serial numbers. Your install base is the only thing that you control completely. Everything else is somebody else's control. So if you can flex that and you build in more activities, so the whole servitization journey is really interesting. How companies are now, you look at companies like Rolls-Royce, who obviously, I mean, they were pioneers of servitization, but there's a lot of others who are now really changing the way that organizations look at that relationship between sales and service. And thankfully, that's really bringing both of them to table to say, hang on a second, in a dwindling market, and most of us are in that, where we've got high product, high cost, low turnover items. Customers want their products to last a lot longer, and they're very expensive to replace. So they're not going to buy them that often, very competitive. You've got to look for how you can provide, in inverted commas, services, something to your customer to make them loyal to you. And that means that service has got a completely different role in today's environment than it perhaps did a few years back, when we were just break fix. Oh yes, the sales sell it, they swan off into the sunset to enjoy their commission, and then the service engineer goes in and fixes it when it's broken or does the maintenance. It's not like that anymore. We really are now working as a partnership to try and make sure. It's almost the analogy I always like to use. It's the salesperson holds the hand of the customer and gives it to the service engineer. The service engineer holds the hand of the customer until the end of life of the equipment and hands it back to the salesperson. And if either breaks the chain, you lose the customer.
I totally agree. It's very tight collaboration between both organizations. And I remember from my field service days as an engineer, The equipment was at the end of life, and the biochemist came to me. I was doing a major repair, and he came to me and he said, Guy, I want you to know that we are renewing business with your employer, and our decision, 50% of our decision is made based on the quality of your service. And this is where we see that collaboration between sales that can bring the right solution at the right price, and service that is doing a good job at making sure the equipment has the best uptime all the time, so that the customers are satisfied and happy with the performance of the equipment and the performance of the company. So it's really a tight collaboration, and that's the only way for organizations to succeed.
Do you think it's got even more so since the pandemic? I mean, we know the pandemic's changed everything. I mean, here we are talking on Zoom, something which was a real fledgling before 2020. Organizations are now saying, hey, I don't really want to spend hours with some salesperson or a procession of salespeople. So we'll do all of that via some form of remote conversation, whether it's telephone, Teams, Zoom, whatever. The person that sees the customer more of the time these days is the service engineer. They are now the face of the company. And what's really interesting about that is we start now looking for different attributes about service engineers. Communication skills, not something engineers have necessarily been the best at in the past. It's not been a strength point, is now becoming really, really important. If you're the face of the company, you must be able to communicate adequately, not just about what you're doing, but also about the company in general. So it's really interesting that as the pandemic has caused another inadvertent change to our environment, which has, I would argue, and certainly we see it within Cephed, pushed forward the service organisation to have an even more important part from our customers' lifestyle.
Very true. And this is how the role of the service engineer has evolved, because it's not only about dealing with the equipment and fixing the equipment, it's really a 360-degree relationship with
Absolutely.
the users and with the customer to really understand their environment and the impact that the equipment makes in their equipment and their environment, and what is the role of the service engineer to make sure that they are meeting the expectations of the customer, and they can participate in the process of sales, and they can assist the sales organization in succeeding in renewing business or even creating new business.
Absolutely.
And you have been a service engineer, now you are in management.
Yeah.
When you look at both roles, what strikes you in each one of them?
Oh gosh, what strikes them? I mean, everybody says, well, I mean, there's a couple of things. The first is the best service engineers make lousy managers. And that's one of these ones which will always get people instantly tapping the keyboard to say, what an idiot, what does he know? And the truth is that if you want to be an engineer, you'll be a great engineer. If you want to be a manager, then you'll probably be a great manager. But if you're a manager and you want to be a great engineer, you're probably not going to do a very good job of it, because they are two very distinct roles. And this idea that used to happen is that, you know, you become the best engineer and then you get promoted to be the team leader. And then, of course, you make a complete mess of it because you were a brilliant engineer. That was something you were very, very good at. But being a team leader or a manager is a different skill set. I think most organizations, certainly larger organizations, are recognizing that management skills, leadership skills are something that they can be taught. And again, engineers can be very, very good at it. But you've got to come back to the ambition. Don't just promote somebody because they are good. Promote somebody because you think they will be good at this and they want to do it. I've lost count of the number of times that I've either had to coach or I have been involved with some form of engineering manager who is just a frustrated engineer and would be far happier if they just were given their toolkit back and said, go and be a field service engineer again, because that's where your passion lies.
Very
So I
true.
think my take is they're two different jobs. Don't think they're the same.
Agreed. And this is a very interesting point you're making because we see it. I myself was a service engineer and I was always ambitious about moving up to management. I can tell you that I had the opportunity and I appreciated it. I was lucky to have it. I know some people who want to move up to management, but they are not getting the opportunity. But what I wanted to say also is that the transition to management was not an easy one.
No.
And I think it's the same for you. The manager you are today is not the manager you were when you moved up from field engineer to management. You had to learn a lot about the differences and you had to switch your thinking from the technical side and fixing the instrument to really managing the work of field engineers and how you can support them and do your job as a manager.
I guess, I mean, in that respect, I was quite lucky because I had that break of going into sales. And I can remember, I mean, because I was going into sales within the same organization that I worked in, so it was an internal transfer. I knew the manager who would become my sales manager. And he openly said to me when he offered me the job, he said, right now, Paul, I've just got to tell you one thing. If I ever see you with a toolkit, I'll fire you because that's not your job anymore. So that mental idea about put your toolkit down and don't get involved was ingrained from day one. And of course, in 2 years, I'd lost most of the skills to be able to do the job. And to the point now that people joke, you know, if you see Paul with a screwdriver, take it off him, he'll probably hurt somebody. But it is one of those things that you do need to get your headspace into the right thing. And you're right, that transfer from leader to manager, from employee to some form of manager and then to leader is really difficult. And most of us that have done it can probably identify one or two people who have helped and an awful lot who have done badly. And I think thankfully my observation is companies are better now at recognizing that jump is huge. And so for people who are junior managers or they want to become managers, they are laying on far more courses and far more opportunities for them to experience what it's like while getting coaching, which of course does two things. I mean, the first is that for those that carry on, they're going to have that idea, that taste, that start to be able to do it. And for others, they're going to have this taste of it and go, goodness me, I don't want that. And they've learned something to say, thanks very much. I mean, I always say, because I've coached lots of managers starting on their journey now, you can either be a manager of things as an engineer, so you become, you know, product managers, technical experts, training, and don't get me wrong, those are fantastic careers and every single organization needs them. They're really, really valuable people. Or you can be a manager of people. So it really depends. What do you want to do? And make sure you get that coaching to do it, because I look back and frequently regale anybody that I'm coaching with tales of how many times I made a mess of it when I was a junior manager or starting out on my management career. And I still look back and cringe now, decades after it. And I guess, you know, once you've had a couple of beers, every single manager has the same stories about, oh, no, I could do better than that, how I made a mess of it. Because you do.
Very true. And I think this is the only way to evolve and improve. You are on the job, you learn on the job. If you're lucky, you have a coach, you have a mentor to help you through, or you're simply fighting on your own and you learn as you go. What is important is not to forget how it was when you were a field engineer and what your team needs from you to support them as you evolve and become a better manager with time. And I think it's the mentality, the growth mentality, the openness to learn and admit mistakes and learn from mistakes that helps, as you mentioned, a manager of people or a manager of products or even a field engineer to improve on themselves.
Mm. Yeah, I think humility is one of those was one of those traits that frequently doesn't get anywhere near enough airtime in the toolkit of a manager. Um, I mean, you make an interesting point of remembering what you needed. Um, I think I'm always a bit cautious about that because things change. And if I look back on when I was an engineer, the world is a very different place, let alone the marketplace. So, how on earth is it going to be the same for, as I was then, a 20-year-old? Um, I can't even comprehend what that's like. So, I think the important thing is having that humility and having that the ability to ask those questions of the team to understand what they want, not to make the assumption that I did it, I was good at it, I is the boss, therefore I will tell you how you need to do it. And of course, that really alienates teams because they go, well, you don't know because you don't do it, and you're talking absolute rubbish. So you end up alienating your team and making them think, well, you clearly are not very good. And it's all down to the fact that you didn't have the humility to be able to say, can you tell me what it is really like? I remember getting told when I started in sales, the old thing, and you probably got told it as well, Guy. You've got 2 eyes, 2 ears, and 1 mouth. Use them in that order. And this was about sales, but I think it's just as good in management sometimes to be able to look, listen, and then talk rather than talk first.
Right.
I dare say my team may disagree that I do it, but at least if I try, I kind of feel. But equally, then the other part is admitting, oh goodness, yes, that's not really worked, has it? Yeah, that's on me, everybody. Really sorry. I've got to apologise to you all. I've made a mess of this. And that takes time and that takes experience as well.
It's, as you said, really about communication and staying in touch with your team and with the reality to be able to give them the support that they need and the customers need. Paul, it has been a great discussion. We're a bit at the end of the time. I'm happy we had this chat today, and I'm looking forward to having you on other talks also. I'll be inviting you to other talks. Thank you very much for sharing with us today your experience, your knowledge. It has been really great discussion. And I want to say to our dear viewers and listeners, thank you for your interest in our discussion. What did you think of what was expressed today by Paul and by myself? Do you agree with the viewpoints that we shared today? I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thanks.